Chapter 18. At long last, love. I climbed the stairway slowly, each step more ponderous, heavier than the one before. My body was trying to resist as if I were carrying myself toward fire. I did feel like someone approaching the doorway to hell, behind which I would surely find the devil herself. Under my arm, the metal box and its horrible information burned. The late afternoon sun had fallen behind dark clouds. Shadows appeared to grow right before my eyes as I started down the second-floor hallway toward Grandma Olivia's bedroom. My heart thumped with each step. I felt drugged, dazed, moving through the corridors of a nightmare. I wasn't even sure I could speak. I thought that when I opened my mouth, all that would be a hiss. Just before I reached the bedroom door, it opened and Mrs. Grafton stepped out. At first she didn't see me in the shadows. Then I stepped forward into the dim hall light. My appearance gave her a start and she gasped, putting her hand to her heart. "Oh, I didn't see you standing there," she said. She paused, blinking rapidly as she studied me. "Are you all right?" "I have to talk to my grandmother," I said in a dreary, dark tone. "She's going in and out," she said. "Nevertheless, I have to talk to her," I said. Mrs. Grafton shrugged. "Suit yourself. I'm going down to get something to eat, and then I'll be bringing her dinner." I nodded, and she walked away. I hesitated, my hand frozen in the air between the knob and myself. I was hoping that at any moment this really would prove only to be a nightmare. Perhaps when I touched the doorknob, I would wake with a shudder and find myself in bed. I didn't. I turned the knob and entered the bedroom. Grandma Olivia was propped up, somewhat on double pillows. Her hair lay in loose strands against her cheeks. Her mouth, twisted and puffy, was slightly open and her eyes were closed. Crippled, felled by this illness, she would have resembled any one of thousands of elderly people stored in old age infirmaries waiting for the clock to make its final bong. However, her diamond rings and bracelets, her rich satin sheets, her linen nightgown loudly declared that it was still a woman of power and prestige. She could issue orders from beyond the grave. I stood by the bedside, glaring down at her, watching her small bosom rise and fall. Her nose twitched and her lips trembled and parted slowly. Her forehead formed folds as painful, ugly thoughts traveled with lightning speed behind her eyes. A reverberated in that darkness closed up within her. I waited, and then I put the metal box down on the bed beside her and opened it. Her eyelids fluttered, opened and then closed before opening again. She gazed up at me, her eyes gathering light, and she became more and more aware of where she was and who I was. Her mouth opened and she uttered some sound. Surely, I thought, some command. "I've come to ask you some questions," I said, "and I want you to know right from the start that your illness won't stop me from demanding answers." Her eyes widened, both with surprise and indignation. She started to protest, and when I lifted the metal box and held it high enough for her to see, her eyes shifted and studied the box, then returned to my face, her face grimacing with a new anxiety. "Yes, Grandma, I found it. Grandpa Samuel talked about it enough to catch my curiosity, and I went down to the basement where you buried all your sins, and I found it and what was inside." I plucked out the first document, holding it for a moment. Then I put the box down and unfolded the document. She started to shake her head, but I continued. "I know you're well aware what's on these papers, but I want you to look again. I'm sure you buried everything downstairs so you wouldn't have to look at it again, but now you do." I thrust the paper out, holding it in front of her. Her eyes moved over it and tried to turn slowly. But I reached out quickly and put my hand on her forehead, easily bringing her head back so she would look at me and the paper. "Who did you think you were? Did you think you were God? What gave you the right to do such a thing, to control everyone else's pain and suffering, to determine someone's whole life, and the lives of those who loved her and she loved. From where did you get this arrogance of power? She began to struggle with speech. How did you get this? I asked, pulling another document from the box. How did you get him to do it? It has something to do with all the rest of it, doesn't it? I'm going to find out, Grandma. I'm going to learn every nitty-gritty detail, and I'm going to expose all of it, I declared. Her eyes went as wide as they could for the first time since I'd known her. I saw real fear burning in them. She shook her head vigorously. Nah. Yes, Grandma. Yes. The precious Logan name will be dragged down to the gutter where it belongs. You may have wealth and property, but you're no better than the most common criminal, and neither are those who assisted you in this. Oh, you're trying to tell me you did this for family again, is that it? She nodded. You were just protecting all the others, I asked with a cold smile. Once again, she nodded vigorously. My smile evaporated. That's the biggest lie of all, Grandma Olivia. Whatever you've done it for yourself, to keep your precious high and mighty position in the community, or your precious reputation. Or you did things to get revenge or hurt others who didn't give you the love and respect you thought you deserved. Don't throw the word family at me. Family is just your excuse for evil. I know that now. She stopped shaking her head and stared. I put the documents back in the metal box. I don't know the end of the story, of course, but I will get to the end, I promised. I closed the box and put it under my arm again. Beginning to get what you deserve, Grandma? I almost pitied you. I almost did what you hate. I almost felt sorry for you. But you don't have to worry about that anymore. I can't find enough forgiveness to sympathize one iota with you. You're home. Free there, Grandma, I said. When I finish this, I'm going to tell the doctor to put you in an infirmary where you belong. You told me not to hesitate when the time came, didn't you? You were so brave then. Well, Aunt Sarah, Carrie, and I will see to it. Even Judge Childs won't resist. I paused. I assume he knew about this too, didn't he? I asked, holding up the box. She stared a moment, closed her eyes, and opened them and shook her head. He didn't? Why not? You mean there was something he would have denied you after all? Were you afraid of that? She nodded, and then she started to shake her head and reach out for me, but I stepped back. There's nothing you could say, nothing, no words, no thoughts, nothing that would justify what you've done and the pain you've caused. I turned and she cried out in her distorted way, uttering a guttural scream that reverberated through my body. With all her remaining strength, she propped herself out and cried out again. But I turned back on her and marched out of the room. The echo of her horrible sound shut away behind me. As soon as I left her, I went downstairs to the office and called Carrie. I want you to come get me, Carrie, I said. I need you to take me someplace. When? Right now, I said. What's going on? You sound strange. He said. Will you do it? I replied. Sure, but thank you. Just be patient with me and I'll explain everything in time, okay? Please, I added. Okay, Melanie, he said, I'll come. After I finished talking to him, I took a deep breath and went to the telephone book, looked up to the number, and called my father. His wife answered. May I please speak with Mr. Jackson, I said. Whom may I say calling? Melanie Logan, I said curtly. One moment, please. A second later, he was on the phone. This is Teddy Jackson, he said formally. Meet me at your office in a half hour, I said. Pardon? Meet me in your office. I have something to show you, and I have something to ask. Actually, a lot to ask. I'm not sure I understand, he said weakly. You will, I promise. Be there, I said, and I hung up the phone, my heart pounding so hard I had to pause to take a deep breath and calm myself. I saw Mr. Grafton walk by with my grandmother's dinner tray. She glanced at me, but continued toward the stairway. Grandma Olivia won't have much appetite tonight, I thought. 20 minutes later, Carrie pulled up in front of the house and I ran out into his truck. What's going on? Something more with Grandma Olivia? Did they take her to the hospital? Not yet, I said. Take me downtown, Carrie. To where? My father's office, I said. What? Please. He stared at me a moment. What's in that box? I promise I'll explain everything as soon as I can, I said. Trust me. Sure, he shrugged and started the engine again and drove us away. Whatever it is, I hope you'll tell me about it soon, he said as we headed toward Commercial Street. He glanced at me. I don't remember you ever acting this strange, Melanie. I took a deep breath but said nothing. He shook his head and drove faster. When we arrived in front of the law offices of Teddy Jackson, we saw the lights were on inside and his car was in its reserved parking space. Carrie started to get out of the truck. Please wait for me in the truck, Carrie, I said. Why? This is something I have to do by myself first. Please? I don't like this, Melanie. You're in some kind of trouble. I should know more about it. I should be able to help you. I'm not in trouble, Carrie. It's not that. Please be a little patient, I said. Reluctantly, he got back in the truck and closed the door. Thank you so much, I said and stepped out. My father's offices were plush, richly carpeted to reveal the leather waiting room sofas, paneled walls, oil paintings. There was a large legal library and his own office was oversized with a set of back windows giving a full view of the harbor. He was standing by the window with his hands in his pocket, gazing out when I entered. What's this all about? He asked, obviously a little annoyed at the way I ordered his appearance. It's about all this, I said, putting the metal box on his large dark mahogany desk. He stared at it a moment and then walked over. What's this? He opened the box and took out one of the documents. As he read it, his face took a more crimson tint. He glanced at me, put the paper down, and read another. She gave you this? No. She had it hidden in the basement, I said. He nodded, blew some air through his lips, and then sat at his desk. Who else knows about it? Just me for now, I said. Carrie's waiting outside in the truck, but I haven't told him anything yet. I want to know everything first, every dirty detail. I don't know every dirty detail, he replied sharply. I glared down at him and shifted my eyes guiltily away. I don't want to do it, but she blackmailed me, he began and turned back to me. I sat in front of the desk. Go on, I said. I didn't think she knew the truth about Haley and me. I'm still not positive how she found out. I suspect Haley told her, taunted her with it maybe. I don't know. He pulled himself up in his chair. She came in here that night, calling me to this office, almost the same way you did, he added with a small smile. And she told me what happened, and what she wanted and what I had to do. I started to resist, and she told me she would not only hesitate to expose me, to bring Haley back, but destroy me, as she was getting a wonderful start. So I did what she wanted. I took care of all the legal issues, he confessed. I wasn't happy about it. I couldn't look at Jacob and Sarah in the face anymore, but in time, she had me believe it was for the best. Oh, I'm sure you were concerned, I said, disdainfully. Well, Look, it was her decision, he protested. She wasn't the mother. She wasn't the father. It wasn't her decision. You let her play God, I shouted. He seemed to shrivel in his chair. His eyes went down. What happened to her, I asked. I didn't want to say anything to Carrie before I knew every possible detail, before I knew her final fate. He looked up. Olivia didn't tell you anything? Grandma Olivia had a stroke. I thought everyone in Providencetown would know by now. She can't talk. Oh. Well? I know only what I was told, Melanie. Laura and Robert Royce went sailing. They got caught in a storm and Robert drowned. Olivia told me that Carl Hansen picked her up in this fishing trawler and brought Laura directly to her. She was a raving lunatic suffering from traumatic amnesia. She was naked when he found her at sea, And Olivia, well, she thought the worst of that, of course. Anyway, Carl had worked it out for Samuel and knew who Laura was. Olivia took control after that. She made sure Carl told no one, and then she decided to have Laura secretly institutionalized. I think the whole affair embarrassed her. Legal guardianship was established, and Laura was left there where she remains this day, as far as I know. I never cared to find out. It was as if my hands by then. He protested. I just assumed as the years went by and she never, that it was for the best. Which eased your own conscience, I accused. And I stood up. I expect you'll give us any help that we need now, I said. He nodded. After I discovered that man I believed was my father was really my stepfather, I used to dream about the man who was my real father. I used to imagine he was a wonderful person, someone who might not have even known he had me as a daughter. But once he found out, he would come running to me, wanting to love me. I used to dream we would finally have a daughter-father relationship. Melanie. Now, I quickly continued, I'm grateful that you chose to be a coward. I don't want anyone ever to know that you're my real father, I said. I couldn't get over the shame. He stared at me, his face bright red, while I gathered up the papers and put them back in the metal box. You're just like her, actually, I said. No wonder fate brought you together. Melanie. I turned and walked away from him, hopefully forever. Carrie read the documents ravenously, then he put the papers down and looked at me. His eyes wide, his mouth pulled so tightly in the corners, his lips looked like they would snap. I don't understand, he said. He shook his head, refusing to believe in such a betrayal and deception. We were sitting in the truck in front of his home. Dark clouds had accompanied the twilight. Now there was a steady, hard rain. I told him all what my father had told me. All this time we've been thinking Grandpa Samuel was babbling about what had been done to Grandma Belinda, I concluded. How could this be? Why? Tears spilled over his lids and trickled down his cheeks as if they were watery creatures escaping. He didn't seem to realize it, even as they dripped from his chin. Her own grandmother, he said, my father's mother? In her distorted way of thinking, she somehow believed she was protecting the family from disgrace and hardship. There's no way to justify what she did, and I condemn her as much as you will, I said. But after living with her and learning who she is and some of her things and what she believes, I understand how this could have happened. I don't. I never will. He closed his eyes and held his head back as if to swallow down some pain. My father suffered great guilt about Laura. I know. And Grandma Olivia knew it too. She must have known it, he said quickly. Maybe she saw only her own guilt, her own pain, her own fears, Carrie. She doesn't have an ounce of love in her, he muttered through his teeth. I hate her more than I've ever hated anyone. I'm glad she had a stroke. I hope she dies tonight, he said. Don't become like her, Carrie. You'll only end up full of hate. You can't love. He stared a moment. What do we do? Do I tell Mom now? No. Let's go there first, I said. Perhaps we can bring her home. He nodded, smiling. Maybe so. He reached for the key in the ignition. We'll go in the morning, Carrie. It's too late now, I said. No, I don't want to think about her being there for 5 minutes more, he said. We have to go now, he insisted. He looked at the papers. I know where this is. It's a floor 4 and a half an hour drive. But it'll be the middle of the night, I reminded him. Who cares about that, he said, and started the engine. I can drop you off if you want. Carrie, Logan, do you think I would let you do this yourself? He shook his head. Okay, let's go, I said. We probably couldn't sleep anyway. Shouldn't you tell your mother something? No, I don't want to utter one more lie, even a white one, he said. I smiled. Okay, But we've got to be prepared for anything, Carrie. I'm prepared, he said. He started away, as prepared as I could ever be. It was a long, hard ride. Carrie talked more about Laura than he had ever talked, recalling things they'd done together, things they used to say. I sensed these were thoughts he had forbidden himself to have for the past few years. He was afraid of what reviving such memories might do to him. A few times during the journey, he sat there silently, crying, tears streaming down his cheeks as if he relived the tragedy and everyone's sorrow. How could Grandma Olivia attend those services knowing what she knew, I wondered. How could she be so confident she was doing the right thing for the family? So positive that she could bury her feelings, watch her son suffer and not say a word. Instead of a heart in that chest, she surely had a cube of ice, I thought. How horrible her own parents must have been to shape her into the woman she had become. I should have been surprised. She put her sister away without a single regret and did the same for her husband. Individuals meant nothing in the face of her fanatical faith and family name. Love was merely a minor inconvenience. Correct behavior, prestige, respect, wealth, and power were the 5 points of her star, the star that embedded on the face of her soul. I lie back and close my eyes and dozed for a while. When I woke, we were near a town. I saw the lights of an all-night restaurant. You want some hot coffee or something, Carrie asked. Yes, please, I said, and we pulled over and ordered coffee and donuts. Carrie drank and ate in a deadly silence, his eyes fixed on his anger, brightening with the stream of fury behind them. I didn't speak. I reached for his hand and smiled at him. He snapped out of his daze and nodded. I'm all right, he said. We'll be all right. Yes, we will, Carrie. We will, I agreed. We had another hour's ride before we found the entrance to the institution. It was tall, a gray stone building with a parking lot on its left. It was too dark to see clearly, but we could make out some of the nice grounds around it. We saw high fences and then woods. The outside lights in front of the building were bright. We parked after Carrie shut off the engine and we sat there both trying to gather strength. Ready? He asked me finally. I nodded and we got out and walked to the entrance. The door was locked, but there was a buzzer with a little sign that read, "Use only after 10 p.m. Carrie pushed the buzzer and we waited. Because of the reflection of the outside lights on the glass doorway, we couldn't see very much inside. It looked like a small entryway before a set of double doors. No one came, so Carrie pushed the buzzer again, holding it longer. It's pretty late, Carrie. Someone's gotta be there, he said, undaunted. Finally, the double doors were open and a red-haired man in a pair of white pants and a light blue shirt stepped out. He looked no more than 30, thin and slim-waisted, at least 6 foot tall with freckles all over his cheeks. He peered through the glass before opening the door, scowled, and then opened it quickly. What do you want? He demanded. We're here to get someone, Carrie said firmly. Huh? My sister, Carrie said. What the hell are you talking about? It's almost 3 o'clock in the morning, the red-haired man said. I don't care what time it is. She's not supposed to be here, Carrie said and stepped between the man and the door. The red-haired man recoiled as if he thought Carrie would strike him. You can't come in here now. Visiting hours begin at 10 a.m., he said. We're here and we're coming in. Get whoever's in charge, Carrie ordered. The red-haired man looked from him to me and then stepped toward the double doors. Carrie put his hand out to keep the double doors from closing. You're going to get in big trouble for this, the red-haired man threatened. Good, Carrie said. Now go get the supervisor or someone. Do it, Carrie ordered so fiercely the man rushed off. Carrie and I followed and entered the lobby. There was a counter with glass window ahead of us. To the right were sofas and chairs, small tables and magazine racks and a television set. The door directly in front of us Most likely would lead into the institution, I thought. We waited and finally heard the footsteps on the other side of the door. It was open and a very heavy woman in a nurse uniform came charging out, her hair chopped rather crudely at the nape of her neck and her earlobes, her hips rubbing against the stiff material of the uniform, producing a loud swish. "What's this all about?" she demanded, directing her beady eyes at Carrie. She folded her arms over her heavy bosom like a battering ram, walked within inches of him. "My sister was illegally brought here," Carrie said. "We've come to take her home." She stared at him a moment, grimaced with confusion, and then glanced at the red-headed man. "Should I call the police?" he asked. "Not quite yet," she said. Her curiosity was piqued. "Who are you, and who's this sister you're looking for?" she asked. "I'm Carrie Logan. This is Melanie Logan. My sister's name is Laura." "Show her," Carrie said. I produced some of the documents that were taken from the metal box. She eyed me suspiciously and took them and began to read. When she finished, I saw that her face softened a bit. "You just found out about this?" she asked. "Yes, today," Carrie said. "Those papers are incorrect. My sister did have parents, and not a legal guardian," he said. "Where are your parents? Why don't they come here too if that's so?" "My father recently died, and my mother's not able to make this journey. In fact, she doesn't know the truth yet," Carrie explained. The nurse handed the documents back to me. "This is a legal matter," she said. "It has to be handled the proper way. Look, but as for your coming here for your sister," she continued, "I'm afraid you're too late." "What?" My heart stopped. I stepped forward and took Carrie's hand quickly. "This young lady unfortunately died a short time after she was admitted," she said. "Died? How?" I asked. "She drowned. We informed the grandmother about it, that she was listed next of kin." "How could she drown?" "It was deliberate, self-induced," the nurse confessed after a moment. "I'm not permitted to discuss the details. There's always legal issues like this when it concerns. It wasn't our fault, however," she added quickly. "I really don't understand who you are and why you're here," she continued. Carrie just stared at her, refusing to believe her. "I want to see my sister, now," he said. The nurse looked at me to see if she had heard it right. "Do you understand what I'm saying?" she said. "Carrie, come on," I said. "No, I want to see her right now. I'm not leaving until I do," he insisted. "Call the police," the nurse told the red-headed man. He spun around and disappeared inside. "Carrie, it's no use," I urged. He shook his head. "You're lying." He told the nurse. "She got to you. You were told to say this in case I ever arrived, weren't you?" "Absolutely not. I don't know anything about you," the nurse said, "and I don't lie about my patients." Another attendant arrived, an older, bigger man. "You got some sort of trouble here?" he asked. "Yes," she said. "The police have been called, Morris." "No one's permitted into the hospital," she said, her eyes fixed on Carrie. "Carrie, let's go," I pleaded, but he was stiff and unmovable as one of Kenneth's statues. It was like trying to uproot a tree. The larger attendant took his position in the doorway. Miss Clinker turned to me. "I'm not lying about this. You have to go through the proper channels, and you'll learn that what I've told you is the truth. You're just making things harder for yourselves." "I'm sorry," I said, "but you have to understand that we just learned about all this, and it's really was done illegally. I'm sure that you can imagine the shock. That's why he's so upset. He doesn't mean to make trouble for you. Please understand," I begged. She considered it and then nodded. "Wait here. I have something that might help you accept what I'm saying," she declared and left us. The attendant was joined by the red-headed man, and they both blocked the doorway. "Cops are on their way," he said gleefully. "Carrie, we're only getting ourselves into deeper trouble," I whispered. He didn't hear me. He glared at the two attendants. Moments later, the nurse reappeared carrying a small cloth bag. These were her personal things. Among them, she said, is this, and she lifted a thick notebook out of the bag. It was her diary. Her doctors encouraged her to keep it, hoping recollections and thoughts would help her revive her identity. Apparently, no one ever came for it. If she wasn't gone, the nurse added in her harder tone, I wouldn't be giving it to you, now would I? I took the bag and the notebook and tugged Carrie's hand. Please, Carrie, she's right. He wilted, accepted what he was told. Where's she buried? He asked softly. I don't know. You'll have to contact Mr. Crowley tomorrow and ask him whatever details he has. He's the administrator here. He'll be at his office at 9 a.m. I'm asking you now to leave the premises. The police are on their way, and you'll be placed under arrest if you don't go, she threatened. Carrie, we're too late, he said more to himself than to me. I'm sorry, Miss Clincher said, but I've told you the truth, and I've done more than I have to do, and more than Mr. Crowley will approve of, I'm sure. Thank you, I said, pulling Carrie harder. He stepped back with me. Laura, he said, shaking his head. I'm sorry, we were too late. We reached the truck just as the police car arrived. The officer spoke to Mrs. Cletcher and then questioned us. When I promised we would leave, they let us go. Carrie drove back on the strength of his anger and hate. We hardly said a word to each other. All that mattered to him now was to find out where Laura had been buried. It was mid-morning by the time we drove into Grandma Olivia's driveway. Both of us were physically exhausted, but our emotions gave us the strength to continue. Loretta came rushing down the hallway when we entered the house. Where have you been? She asked. What is it? Your grandmother turned worse last night and was rushed to the hospital, she said. She's not going to die, Carrie said, shaking his head at me. She's not going to get away with it that easily. Loretta's eyes nearly bulged out of her head. What? Nothing. We're on our way to the hospital, I told her, and we left. We found Judge Childs in the lobby talking to the doctor when we arrived. Melanie, where have you two been? He asked. Everyone's worried sick. Never mind where we've been, Carrie said. How is she? Can she talk? I'm afraid not, the doctor said. She's fallen into a coma. Carrie's shoulders sank. Then he brightened with the thought. Do you know about Laura? He asked the judge. What? What about Laura? He doesn't know, Carrie, I said. She did tell me that. What's he talking about, Melanie? The judge asked. We went to the hospital cafeteria to get something to eat, and I told my grandfather the story. He listened with horror. I guess I really never knew her, he said. To keep all that from me? She was very determined. Private woman who literally needed no one. I'm sorry, he said to Carrie. I'll find out what you need to know. I promise, he said. You two go home and get some rest. Let me take care of this. Thank you, Grandpa, I said, and he smiled. I went home with Carrie to help him with Aunt Sarah and May, after which we went to his attic hideaway and fell asleep in each other's arms. At the moment, it seemed to be the safest place in the whole world. Epilogue. Grandma Olivia died 2 days later, having never regained consciousness. Her doctor said it was a blessing because she would have come out of the coma and she would have been far worse, and Olivia Logan was not the sort of woman who could live under institutionalized care. Carrie did not want to attend the funeral, but a strange thing happened to me. I suddenly saw things from Grandma Olivia's perspective. Why air our dirty laundry in public? Why embarrass the family? After all, I explained, you still want to live and build a life here, Carrie. He listened and then shook his head with a smile. You are probably the right choice for Grandma Olivia's throne, Melanie. I'll give the devil her credit there, but that's about all, he added firmly. Okay, I'll put on the proper face. I'm going to need you to make sure I do the right things from now on, he kidded. Kenneth and Holly had returned from their honeymoon, and we all spent the night together going over the recent events. She was a cold, hard woman and so intimidating most men didn't challenge her, especially the men in the family, Kenneth remarked. I remember how afraid I was when I was younger and we used to visit Haley and Chester and Jacob. When she told us something, we did it fast. I never thought of her happy, though. She didn't want anyone else to be happy either, Carrie muttered. None of us spoke. It was better to let thunder and lightning play itself out and look forward to brighter skies. The funeral was as large as expected. We decided not to have Grandpa Samuel brought along. He didn't understand what was happening, and we all agreed it would just be more confusing and troublesome for him. I don't know how I got through my final exams, but I did, and my grades were as good as ever I had hoped. I stayed at Aunt Sarah's and shut myself into what was Laura's room, spending almost 2 days writing and rewriting my valedictorian speech. Since Grandma Olivia's hospitalization and death, I had moved in with Carrie, Aunt Sarah, and May again. I hated the thought of being in that grand, empty mansion full of darkness, shadows, and family secrets. The judge began to go over all the real estate documents for us one day, and we all went to her home to listen what would be Grandma Olivia had done and promised. She left the instructions for my taking eventual control of most of the family fortune. In the meantime, it was held in a trust, supervised by her bankers and brokers, and the judge was appointed executor. You'll have to decide about the house, he said. You can put it up for sale or you can move into it. Let's put it up for sale, I said quickly. I don't think it holds any happy memories for the family. I understand, the judge said. With such a fortune in our hands, Carrie could be confident that his boat building business would be a reality. He could build his own small beginnings and establish his own company. Kenneth gave him advice, and the two of them went searching for an area to put up a factory. The night before graduation, Carrie and I took a walk on the beach. I was too nervous to sleep anyway. So much attention was on me and the family since Grandma Olivia's passing. I was nervous and sure the audience would hang on every word of my valedictorian address. Have you given thought to what you're going to do, Melanie? Carrie asked me. We stopped at the edge of the water and stared at the moonwalk that led to the edge of the world. I'm not going to a prep school, Carrie. The kind of life Grandma Olivia was designing for me is not the life I want for myself, I said. I don't want to strive to get the name in society columns. I know you're really smart and you should probably go to college, but I don't want to go to college. Just to say I'm in college, Carrie. Maybe I'll go next year, but somewhere close, I think I'll have a clear view of what I want. What's that? He asked, turning to me. I want something simpler, but more substantial. I want what I never had, Carrie. I want a real family, real love. Could you have it with me, now? He asked timidly. We could build this new house together and we could build our own house and I put my fingers to his lips. I was wondering when you would have the nerve to ask, I said, and he laughed. We held each other. The ocean seemed to glitter even more. And the stars were never as bright. The next day was magnificent, without a cloud in the sky, with the wind warm and gentle. We were able to have an outdoor graduation ceremony. I began my speech with the first lines of a mountain song Papa George had taught me years and years ago. I have come a long way from home with just a hope and a prayer, but I've got a suitcase full of memories to keep me warm on lonely nights. I turned to my fellow graduates and talked about graduation as a kind of pulling up an anchor and setting sail, of being captains of our own destiny. We're leaving our parents, our friends, our teachers back at shore and setting out a course of our own making. I talked about the courage and opportunity and thanked the families and teachers for giving it to us. I ended the verse by singing the first line of This Land is Your Land. An amazing thing happened. The whole audience joined me and sang the whole song. I was overwhelmed by the applause and congratulations afterward. Carrie's eyes grew dark and angry, but he kept his rage contained when people told him how proud Grandma Olivia would have been. Afterward, we had a party at Aunt Sarah's. Kenneth, Holly, and Judge Childs were there, as well as Roy Patterson and Teresa. Carrie made a clam bake, and I played the fiddle. Judge Childs said he would take a piece of his graduation cake up to Grandpa Samuel the next day. Carrie and I set a date for our wedding soon after. In the meantime, I spent the summer days with May and Aunt Sarah while Carrie worked on the new boat and began to build the factory on the site where Kenneth had found. One morning, May came in with the mail and waved something at me. All excited, it was a postcard. It had been sent from Palm Springs, California. There wasn't much written. Hi, I just thought I'd drop you a line to tell you that I'm no longer with Richard. I'm with a real agent this time. He's even taken me to Palm Springs for a holiday and says I'd have a good chance of making it. Wish me luck. Gina Simon. Who's Gina Simone? May signed and then pronounced the best that she could. Just someone I once knew, I said. No one really. I tossed the card into the garbage can, but later I went back to retrieve it. I couldn't help it. I was like someone lost in the desert who'd been given a drop of water to cherish. What else could I do? I went upstairs and put the letter in my mementos. And then I looked at Laura's bag of possessions, the only things left in her from her strange and tragic existence. Neither Carrie nor I could get ourselves to do anything about them. I couldn't just ignore them anymore. However, I reached in and took out the thick notebook, which had been her diary. Then I went downstairs and sat behind the house in the big wooden chair that faced the ocean and began to read. A long time ago, I lived in a fairy tale, it began. My eyes lifted from the page as I took a deep breath. Off in the distance, a sailboat looked like it was caught in the calm, remained painted against the blue horizon, while above it, puffy white clouds waited for the same wind. All the world was standing still, holding its breath. Even the terns froze on the beach and looked my way. When the wind began again, it carried a song. It wished I would sing for Laura. For Carrie, for all of us. I would sing it, I thought. Now, finally, I would sing it.